My name is Amanda, and I am here with...
Good afternoon/evening, everybody. My name is Tanisha.
And we are with the Tampa Hillsborough County Public Library. Today we're going to be talking about the celebration of Dia de los Muertos and our Celebrations Around the World series. So Tanisha, let's go ahead and turn off our cameras right now. We will be back for the Q&A. Okay, so before we get right into the information about the background of the program, we just want to let you know a quick note about our celebrations around the world. These are meant to be overviews of the cultural traditions of the celebration we're talking about. So today we will be talking about Dia de los Muertos, and it's really more about the how it is celebrated and where it's celebrated is what our discussion is going to be focusing on, and ways that you can observe the holiday. Now, I do want to note there are probably regional variations. It is mostly associated with Mexico, which is where it originated from. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But if there is something you do in your own celebration that we don't mention, it's not because it's not important, but because this is an overview of the holiday. But if you do have a celebration, part of your celebration that we don't mention, please let us know in the in the question section, and we would love to share that with the audience. Okay, Tanisha, let's get into it and find out when and where Dia de los Muertos is celebrated.
Yes, but before we talk a little bit about Dia de los Muertos, let's ask our audience if they will be celebrating, or do they celebrate Dia de los Muertos?
Good question. Our first poll, yes. Let's launch that poll.
All right, so I went ahead and opened it. Amanda, do you celebrate Dia de los Muertos?
I will say I have, but I didn't grow up celebrating it every year, not in my direct family, but my aunt, mi tia, she does do una ofrenda every year. She does, and we will be finding out more of what that is later in the program. Tanisha, do you or your family celebrate the holiday?
No, we don't, but we do have our own commemorations dealing with those who have passed, and we are also going to talk a little bit about that as we jump into our presentation. It looks like everybody has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and let's see what the answer is. So it looks like we don't have anybody who does quite yet, but maybe after learning a little bit about what the holiday is about, maybe people will change their minds. So Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and hide that poll. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are back in the PowerPoint.
All right, so let's jump right into when and where Dia de los Muertos is celebrated. And I apologize offhand for my horrible Spanish. So this vibrant celebration is celebrated November 1st through November 2nd, so it's a 2-day celebration. It coincides with many autumn celebrations. So it's not necessarily like a harvest festival, but it does coincide with a lot of fall, harvest, autumn celebrations. One of the most famous ones that it is paired with, and one you may be familiar with, is Halloween. We're going to be saying this a lot through this presentation, but Dia de los Muertos is not the Spanish or Mexican version of Halloween. It's a very, very different celebration, but it does happen during that time, and along with some other holidays that Amanda is going to cover here shortly. So it did originate in Mexico, so it is celebrated in Mexico and by the Mexican diaspora. So anywhere where there may be Mexicans that have immigrated or moved, you'll see Dia de los Muertos celebrations there. There are significant celebrations in Central and South America, which makes a lot of sense. So some that I wanted to highlight that I thought was really cool. There's one in Belize. They have a big celebration there by the Yucatec Maya ethnicity. They call theirs Etano Pixon. So they do have their version of the holiday. Also in Ecuador by the Quechua people, which is an indigenous group to Ecuador. They have a big celebration, and that went on to be celebrated by the wider population of Ecuador. So one cool thing about theirs is that restaurants add Dia de los Muertos delicacies to their menus during this time. So you'll go into a restaurant in Ecuador and they'll have some of the food there. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. And Also in the United States, of course, since the United States borders Mexico. So there are significant celebrations in the Southwest in California. The largest ones are in California. You'll also see large celebrations in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. So a lot of cool celebrations around, it is celebrated widely around the world, but concentrated in Spanish-speaking countries.
Right. And I think something that is interesting is it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer, Dia de los Muertos, because it is not just one day. It is November 1st and 2nd. So I think something, Tanisha, is it's actually split up. The first day of the celebration is dedicated. It is a festival to honor those your family members who've been deceased. So the first day concentrates on children, and the second day concentrates on adults. Okay, and actually, we are going to get into some more of those origins. So, like a lot of festivals and celebrations throughout Mexico, Latin America, and South America, it really is a mix-up, mashup of pre-Hispanic indigenous cultures and also Christian observances. So it really, you see elements from both influences and how it became the celebration that it is today. So the original centuries old celebration, which was not called Dia de los Muertos, but it does come from Aztec, Toltec, and other Nahua people, who are the indigenous people of central Mexico. And really, it was their philosophy on life and death was much different. They actually considered death as part of it was a natural part of the life cycle. And it was not actually the end of the life cycle. So they did not mourn the dead. Instead, they had religious rites to celebrate and welcome back the dead. And the idea was that the dead would come back from, I do know Spanish, but I do not know these words because they are in a different language. Mictlan, which is the afterlife, or it was the level of the underworld where the dead would reside. So during those 2 days, or during these religious rites, they would come back. And actually, Mictecasihuat, she is the goddess of death, and her husband, Mictlantecutli, again, pardon me if the pronunciation was a little off, that is her husband. They would oversee Mictlan, which is the underworld where the dead would reside. And then where it comes from the Christian observances, specifically in this case Catholicism, is that in the modern times, Dia de los Muertos, as we have said, falls on November 1st and 2nd, which coincides with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day on the Catholic calendar. So actually, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day have their own very interesting origin stories as well, how those are a mix of different cultures, including Christianity and some different cultures as well. But one way I think, Tanisha, that it gets conflated with Halloween is another day for All Saints' Day is All Hallows' Day. And we know the night before All Hallows' Day has been renamed in modern times Halloween. So there is that lingual connection, but in terms of celebration and the beliefs, it is much different.
Yes, Amanda, you're absolutely right. And something else that's really interesting about the origins of Dia de los Muertos is that you see this type of origin story in other Latin American countries. So for example, in Cuba, a lot of the indigenous populations and especially the African populations would hide their traditions and their rituals behind Christian observances because they weren't allowed to openly celebrate the way that they wanted to. So they would use saints and different, Christian symbols to hide their indigenous and their cultural rituals behind it. So you see this in like the Santeria religion in Cuba, right, where like the saint candles are used and things like that. Additionally, what I think is very interesting about the origins of Dia de los Muertos and other Latin American commemorations of the dead is that there is a lack of fear that I think you see in a lot of Western countries where death isn't exactly embraced because nobody embraces death, but it's not feared. So it's just a natural part of the life cycle. And it's a way of, respecting that life cycle of how death is commemorated. So it may seem, and I'm going to talk here a little later in a minute here about how it's a joyous celebration. It's not meant to be mocking, but it's a way to commemorate and to remember the fragility of life.
Exactly, celebratory. And like you said, there's a lot of cultures around the world that do have, death is part of the natural cycle, and it's something, there's reverence there. I know Japan has Oban that just passed, and it was in August. China, Cambodia also have similar types of festivals.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the observations and celebrations. So, as I just mentioned before, it is a joyous celebration commemorating the lives of loved ones who have passed away. So the other holidays that are associated, like for example, Halloween. Halloween has more of a horror, mischievous, I can never say that word, way of dealing with things. All Saints Day and All Souls Days are more somber. This is a joyous celebration. So there is a lot of joy that is involved. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of really vibrant things that happen in these celebrations. So hallmarks are parades, costumes, offerings to the dead, and lots of singing and dancing. So it does seem like a party atmosphere for it, but there is another, like Amanda and I just mentioned, there is a layer of reverence involved in that as well. So speaking of that, I'm not going to go too in depth because Amanda is going to cover the offering, but it is, a lot of them are in the form of an altar. Amanda's going to talk about that later, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but there's the parades are very vibrant, a lot of colors, a lot of flowers, as you can see there. Celebrants also write short humorous poems called calaveras to poke fun at living friends and families. So along with the commemoration of the dead, there is also commemoration of the living. And these calaveras are treated like living epitaphs, like something that you would write on a tombstone. So they may write it in a way that's like, here lies so-and-so, but they're meant to be humorous and poke fun at the person. Historically, these were, recited over the radio, published in newspapers. Now that tradition has kind of moved over to social media. So on the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, you may see this on people's Instagram feeds or their Facebook feeds or something when they are offering these. As with a lot of our celebrations, food is very, very important part of the celebration.
Of course.
So we got the pan de muerto. Amanda's going to talk about that. Sugar skulls. Cool thing about the sugar skulls is that it was actually originated from Italian missionaries in the 1600s. So those came from Italy. So Italian missionaries that made their way over to Mexico, they brought those. There's also a drink called pulque. Pulque is fermented agave sap. I'm sure it's tasty. There's also atole, which is a thin porridge that's made with corn flour, sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla. And also, they do have hot chocolate as part of the celebration. Everybody loves a little bit of hot chocolate. I personally like mine with a little bit of peppermint. And another thing, while there are common elements to all of these celebrations, there are specific traditions based on regions in Mexico. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about a few of those. And in the region of Pátzcuaro, which is 225 miles west of Mexico City, the indigenous population there holds an all-night vigil in an indigenous cemetery. It's one of the more somber commemorations of Day of the Dead. So they sail out to this indigenous cemetery that's on an island. They are all in canoes. Each canoe has a single lighted candle, and they do this in the evening time, and they sail out to this island where the cemetery is to commemorate their dead. Also in Tuxtepec, there are this tradition of making sawdust rugs. So this is I'm using air quotes here, rug that is made with sawdust, petals, rice, and other organic materials. So it's not a rug, but it's a bunch of stuff basically created, like organized to look like a rug. So something that's very cool there. And of course, some of the largest celebrations can be found in Mexico City, which makes a lot of sense. It's the largest city in Mexico. So they have a grand parade, like a lot of the images that you see do come out of the Mexico City celebration. So each region kind of has their different spin on Dia de los Muertos. And also bringing it back to the United States for a minute, you'll also see, depending on where people immigrated from, if when they came to the United States, you'll see different elements of their traditions and the American celebrations as well.
You know, it's interesting because I also read about the sawdust rugs, and it reminded me of when we did celebrations around the world, Diwali, which is a very different type of celebration, but they had the flower petal or the different sand decorations, which are similar. So I always think it's fascinating how across different cultures there's similar elements. In terms of celebrating, I think the most important thing is always going to be your altar, because that is something you celebrate personally and you can do it from within your home. So even if you don't have a community-wide celebration, you still are, you still are making those offerings to your loved ones. Okay, should we find out more about those altars? So let's go into some of the glossary and learn a little bit more about the terms associated with Dia de los Muertos. So the first thing we're going to talk about, which is you can see here on the left side of the picture, is papel picado. And this is actually, a lot of times people associate it with just Dia de los Muertos, but it is really for all celebrations. You know, it's colorful tissue paper that's specifically designed. And what papel picado actually means is pierced paper. So it's an artisanal, it's made artisanally. It is one of those crafts that is passed down in different generations. And basically what they do is they line up tissue paper and they either cut it or they use a chisel. They'll stack it up very thick and use a chisel to make those specific designs and then have several copies of the design. The most traditional one for Dia de los Muertos is a pattern with skulls around the altar. So that is usually what you will see for Dia de los Muertos, and they will decorate their altar with it. It is one of the 4 important elements of the altar, which is also called an ofrenda. And the ofrenda is the altar you create to make an offering. So that's where the word sounds like ofrenda, offering for your deceased loved ones. And the altar is usually 3 tiers, and it involves food, photographs of the loved ones, and there's usually 4 elements, the 4 elements of the earth, which are fire, water, earth, and air. So if you look at the papel picado, that's the element of your altar that usually represents the air. For fire, you have candles, or in Spanish, they're called velas. You can, some of those are the religious candles, the anointed candles you can have there. That is what represents fire in your ofrenda. Water, the idea is you leave out a pitcher of water for when your loved ones return after their long journey. They are going to be parched, so that water is to quench their thirst. And then the earth element that you include is food. Now, this can be the favorite food of the person that you are doing the altar for, or it can be pan de muerto, which is a very common food. We're going to get to that shortly. But that is one of the 4 elements that you would include in your ofrenda. So, and especially too, if on the first day of Dia de los Muertos, you're going to have maybe a favorite toy or a favorite item of if it is a child. Okay, on to our next item, which is calavera, which Tanisha spoke on briefly, which means skull. So calaveras themselves, as you mentioned, the sugar skulls, or calaveras de azúcar, they did come in the 17th century by Italian monks. I thought that was fascinating. I had no idea about that. But the actual symbol was made popular by a Mexican printmaker. He was also an illustrator and lithographer, and his name was Jose Guadalupe Posada. And he created these etchings, these zinc etchings, artwork, which one was called the Calavera Garbancera, which is like the dapper skeleton or the elegant skull. And it was, it's the skeleton in that very fancy turn of the century, wearing that turn of the century clothes. And then between 1910 and 1913, he created the famous image or icon of Dia de los Muertos, which is La Catrina, or sometimes she's called La Calavera Catrina. And that is, you see, it's the image of the woman. She's wearing the big hat with flowers around her, the early 1900s garb. And really what he was doing is he was kind of using these skeletons to poke fun. He was doing political and literary satire and political critique to say, no matter where you are in society, we all die. We all end up in the same place. And Tanisha, that was around the same time that those literary calaveras, those epitaph poems, were also very popular. So it kind of went hand in hand with the celebration. Of course, today La Catrina is the most famous icon you see of Dia de los Muertos. A lot of people do wear costumes to their celebrations, And one of the costumes you will see on very many people is the face paint and the dressing up in the costume of La Catrina. We did talk a little bit about Pan de Muerto. That is part of the earth representation of the four elements. This is one, it's hard to say because it does have a lot of regional variation as to how it's baked and what it tastes like, but it is one of those common foods that is included on the altar. And a lot of times it's flavored with anise and it's in a bun-like shape. And then you can take the extra dough on top. You either decorate it so it looks like there's bones on top, which symbolizes the dead, your deceased loved ones, or it could be symbolized teardrops, which would be more towards the Christian observances of mourning your lost loved ones. And sometimes pan de muerto, it's known as a type of pan dulce or sweet bread or baked good. And then the last one, it's the same thing, but it goes by many different names. Like we're saying, it's a mix of different cultures. So you've got some of that Aztec, Nahuatl tradition. You've got some Spanish mixed in there. So it can either be called Flor de Calendula, Maravillas, or Cempasúchil. Again, apologies if I mispronounced the last one. And that is the marigold flower. It's the beautiful, bright yellow-orange hue of the marigold. It's also known as the Flor de Muertos sometimes because it's so often associated with Dia de los Muertos. And what it is you'll see it both decorating gravesides and altars and different places, but you'll also see it spread on the altar itself. And it's both real flower petals and it's also big, you make big paper flowers of the Virgin of it to decorate. And back to Aztec history and mythology, the idea was that the marigold was so fragrant that its aroma would wake the dead and bring them back for celebration. And then you can scatter that, on pathways, grave sites, and it's the idea it's so bright and beautiful that it will lead the dead ones back to their loved ones, back to the altar that you've made for them. Another one that's not on our list, but is related to that color, Tanisha, is actually the monarch butterfly, which is another symbol of Day of the Dead, and it's another common costume you see. And why that is, it's known, monarch butterflies are kind of the carriers of the spirit of the dead. And again, it's that same bright orange hue about leading people back. But also it's also scientific in a way because monarch butterflies, as we know, migrate from the north south. And usually when they first show up in the area of Mexico, central Mexico, is around the 1st of November. So they would kind of show up at that time and people would see it as a sign that the spirits of their loved ones were returning.
Yes, and Amanda, something interesting about this glossary is that you see a lot of words being used in different ways. So like we said before with the calavera, it means skull, and it is about all the skulls that are associated, and also the poems, the humorous poems that you write. Something else that is really I don't think interesting is the right word, but really nice but it's a hard one to talk about the ofrendas is, along with the pan de muerto, the marigolds, is that a lot of times people will put things on the ofrenda, on the altar, that were significant to that person. So if it was a man that enjoyed cigars, they would put cigars on there. If it was, a woman who enjoyed knitting, they would put maybe her knitting needles on there. So these are very personal.
The water sign does not have to be water. It could be one of their favorite beverages. And another way it kind of ties in. So we talked about the calaveras de azúcar, and a lot of times you take one of those and you put the name of the person on the forehead. And that's also part of to personally welcome that person back. But you're right, a lot of times you put tokens or special items because the idea is they are coming back to celebrate and visit, and you want to welcome them back in the best way possible with all their loved things.
Yes, exactly. So now that we have talked about all of the celebrations and all of the significance of Dia de los Muertos, it is time for you to learn a little bit more. So if you would like to learn more, the library has a bunch of different resources out there for you to learn. So World Book Encyclopedia is wonderful, especially for kids. They have a lot of great articles about the celebration of Dia de los Muertos. A lot of stuff can also be found on our platform, Libyan Overdrive and Hoopla. So one thing that Amanda and I noticed as we were looking at different resources is that the Disney movie Coco does a wonderful job of representing the celebration of Dia de los Muertos. So if you're interested in watching that, that DVD is available for checkout through the library. And also the soundtrack is available on Hoopla. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that or watch the movie, it's a lovely movie.
It really is beautiful. And
so we're going to go ahead. So we had a lot to say, Amanda, about Los Muertos. So we're going to go ahead and open things up for questions. Amanda and I are going to go ahead and come on to the screen. And while we're waiting for questions, I think we have enough time for one trivia question. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, let's do that. Why don't you go ahead and launch that trivia question, and we'll see. It looks like we don't have any questions right now, so let's do a trivia question, and then we will wrap things up for tonight.
Okay, so I think I got a good one here. Let's see. What is the name of the famous icon image of Dia de los Muertos? So let's see, test your knowledge a little bit. We got the answers coming in here. So coming in nice and fast. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to vote. All right. And let's go ahead and close it. So Amanda, let's see how everybody did.
Okay, and ooh, it was close. So about half of us got it right. They are similar names. It is La Calavera Catrina, La Catrina. But Catalina and Candela, they are very close. They sound similar, but it is La Catrina, who is that famous image and icon designed by Jose Guadalupe Posada. So, Tanisha, let's tell them a little bit about how they can contact us. So if you have any questions about using the library, maybe some of those resources we talked about, getting your library card, or just finding out other information about the library, you can always contact us online at hcplc.org/contact. If you do want to find more of our upcoming events, we still have many events left in October and a very full calendar in November with our NEA Big Read for an American Sunrise. If you want to find all of those events, please go to our full calendar of events at hcplc.org/events. We want to thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and we hope we will see you at a program very soon.
Bye, everybody.